Hello everyone, this is Isaac White from the Crockett Tavern Museum here in Morristown, Tennessee. And we want to welcome you all to the first of a series of special episodes in honor of the upcoming holiday, Christmas. Now, when we hear the word Christmas, we tend to think about a lot of things. Giving and receiving gifts could come right at the top of the list, I guess. Some of you with Black Friday PTSD might well remember the mad dash it took to get those Christmas gifts. Others, we tend to think of certain things like nostalgic childhood moments, and then we could also think of traditions as well that we practiced when we were growing up and still observe today. One Christmas tradition in particular that we're going to focus on here for just a moment is that of caroling. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of different Christmas carols that we all know and love, but one in particular has a line in it that's intrigued me, and it goes something to this effect. Have yourself a merry little Christmas, make the Yule-tide gay. The Yule-tide. How many times have we seen that mentioned in Christmas movies, written on Christmas cards, or of course heard it in Christmas songs? To wit, one song in particular that you might have heard of, Deck the Halls. And in this particular line it goes, Troll the ancient Yuletide carol. Well, that line's a bit confusing, because what the heck does troll mean, and what is the Yuletide carol, and what does it sound like? Well, before I answer those questions, I'll go ahead and apologize for abusing your ears with what I called singing. But full disclaimer here, we got some more Christmas episodes coming up, folks, and well, there's going to be a little bit more singing in it, so I do apologize for that. But to troll means simply to sing in a loud, rolling, hearty, or merry voice. In other words, just belt it out like you're in the shower and nobody is watching. As for the Yuletide Carol, it's a reference to one of the oldest known Christmas songs, if you will, that was written in the 4th century AD called Jesus Refusit Omnium, or Jesus Shines Above All. But is this where we start to see the beginning of all things Yule, including the customs and traditions surrounding it? Absolutely not. In fact, to find that out and understand where we get some of these practices from, we'd have to travel as far back as 500 BC, wherein the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples were already practicing the holiday known as Yule. Now, depending upon where you lived and what kind of priest you had, you would be required to celebrate Yule for differing lengths of time. But of course, like any good thing, you got to kind of pregame. You got to get things going. And one of the ways that they would start celebrating Yule was by making sacrifices. Now, I know there are going to be some people who will try and think of human sacrifices, and although they did happen, there is no mention of human sacrifices around the time of Yule. Rather, it would be simply livestock sacrifices, and they would bring in pigs, goats, and even horses to sacrifice to the various deities which they worshipped. After the sacrifices were completed, the priest would gather up bowls of blood, and with sacrificial twigs, they would adorn the walls of the temple. They would adorn the idols of the gods, as well as the men who attended the festival. But one particular sacrifice gives us two customs that we still observe today, and that is the sacrificing of a boar. Now, before the boar was slain, it was taken into the hall of an earl, who would place it in the center of the hall, and everyone was allowed to come up and place his hand upon the boar and make oaths or vows, which they would keep into the new year. And it's this particular custom of taking oaths or making vows around the time of midwinter and keeping them into the new year that gave us the practice of making New Year's resolutions. Another thing about the sacrificing of the boar is that it was an animal sacred, considered sacred to the god Frey. And after it was sacrificed, the boar's flesh was consumed, and this was a way in which they would implore the god Frey to bestow his blessings upon them for the next year, particularly around the time of planting or harvesting. Can you say Christmas ham, anyone? But outside of the temples and the longhouses, the world of the ancient Germanic peoples was considered to be dark and scary. and particularly around the time of the winter solstice, which is when the barrier between the living and the dead was deemed to be at its thinnest. And because of this, denizens of Helheim as well as restless spirits were allowed to wander around the realm of Midgard and torture the living. For those of you who don't know, Midgard is Earth. But they were allowed to torture the living, but that all soon came to a stop when the skies grew dark and the wind howled down from the mountains into the piney forest. And it was at that particular point that those restless evil spirits began to tremble in fear, for they knew that the wild hunt had begun, a procession of dark riders with Odin, the Allfather of the gods, riding at the lead, mounted upon his 8-legged horse Sleipnir, and they knew that if they were captured, they would be sent to the underworld. Now, although this did bode well for those mortals, well, they also had to be careful, because if one was to step foot outside of his home while the wild hunt was going on, then they took the risk of possibly being whisked away by one of those spirits, or Odin himself, in the wild hunt, and they would be sent to the underworld before their time. And interestingly enough, it was from this concept of the wild hunt that a nightly sleigh ride and a jolly old man would emerge, but we're going to talk about him in the next video. But aside from that, we see that there are other traditions that surround this Yule time that we still inadvertently know and observe today. Particularly, and mind you, traditions don't have to be something you actually practice. It could be something as simple as a decoration. And some of the decorations that are most associated with the Christmas time are Christmas greeneries, the most notable of which is the Christmas wreath, which traces its origins back to the Yule wreath, which was a large wooden wheel stuffed with dried grasses. And then it was lit on fire and rolled down a hill into a pond. And as onlookers watched, as the water engulfed the flames and the water hissed like so many serpents, they took note of the symbology of just how this represented the sun's journey, how as of right now at the winter solstice, it was at its weakest, and yet with the oncoming of spring, it would once again renew life and strength and resilience and bring warmth and sunshine to grow their crops for those who needed it most. But aside from all these different symbols and practices and beliefs, what is the one symbol that is most heavily associated with the Yule time or the Yule-tide? Well, that would be the Yule log. Interestingly enough, the first mention of the Yule log actually comes to us from a book of legal obligations written in 1184 AD, in which it states that the Mancha of Aland would receive a private tree for a private festive fire around Christmas Eve. But it was the 13th century Icelandic poet Snorri Sturluson who really started to do his research and make the connections between the burning of the Yule log and the festival of Yule itself. And this, in accordance at least with what Sturluson wrote, was supposed to have brought good luck, prosperity, and peace to the families who burned the Yule log the whole night through. But if any one of you know anything about burning a fire, if you've got good wood, it's not going to burn very long. It'll be consumed fairly quickly, which has led to a lot of speculation and debate about this particular practice in general. And interestingly enough, we see that the sagas that Sturluson drew inspiration from, they do not mention the Yule log itself. Rather, they mention the importance of keeping the fire burning in the great central fireplaces of the halls and the temples that were constantly kept going year-round, because one, you're living in a cold place, and also you have to cook. So no one's placing any kind of importance upon a Yule log. And it's because of this that we unfortunately kind of have to shed doubt upon Sturluson's account. But whether or not the Yule log was being burnt at this time of the year, on these cold, dark winter nights, it doesn't really matter. What matters is how, when you get together, you celebrate the holiday with your family. Now, of course, I wouldn't urge any one of you to sacrifice anyone because, well, from what I hear, that's pretty well frowned upon. but you also have to remember is that throughout the years, when it comes to certain traditions or customs observed around holidays, that they can either be watered down or amped up. Future generations can take away from or build onto. And at this point, really the only thing you need to remember is how fortunate you are to be able to celebrate, whether or not you believe in the holiday as we celebrate it today, or even as they celebrated it back then. What's important is that you take stock of the fact that you are fortunate to be able to celebrate it with your family in the manner you see fit. But folks, this concludes today's episode, and we hope you'll stay tuned for the next episode. I don't believe there's any singing in that one, so you get a bit of a break. But we want to thank you so much for coming along as we study these different types of subjects. Also, we want to thank you for following along on Facebook and YouTube. Your support is greatly noted. And if you haven't already, go ahead, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you don't want to miss an upload, then please click the bell icon to be notified when we do upload our videos. But anyhow, folks, I went ahead and I done took enough time out of your day, and I know that as it gets closer to the Christmas time, well, things are going to get a lot busier. So I don't want to take up too much of your time. But with that being said, I'll go ahead and get out of your hair, and so I say to you, this is Isaac White from the Crockett Tavern Museum, signing off for now, saying goodbye and God bless.